The old ashen mill sat on the edge of pinewood forest, its skeletal frame looming over the landscape like a specter of times long past. The once bustling mill had been silent for decades, its machinery rusted and its walls crumbling. Locals whispered of the place, speaking in hushed tones of shadows that moved on their own and strange sounds that echoed through the night. The mill had been built in the early 1800s, a symbol of progress and prosperity. For years, it had been the lifeblood of the small town of Pinewood, providing jobs and a sense of purpose. But that had all changed one dark and stormy night in 1922. A fire had broken out, consuming the building and trapping dozens of workers inside. Those who survived spoke of hearing the screams of their co-workers long after the flames had been extinguished. The town had never recovered, and the mill was left to rot, a grim reminder of the tragedy that had befallen it. For years, the mill remained undisturbed, an eerie monument to the past. But as time went on, curiosity began to get the better of people. Teenagers dared each other to spend the night inside. Urban explorers ventured into its darkened halls, and ghost hunters set up their equipment in search of proof of the paranormal. Most came back with stories of strange occurrences. The sound of machinery clanking, footsteps echoing through empty corridors, and whispers that seemed to come from the walls themselves. One chilly October evening, a group of friends decided to explore the mill. There were 4 of them: Mark, Jenny, Tom, and Lisa. They were all in their early 20s, full of bravado and eager for adventure. They had grown up hearing the stories about the mill and had always wanted to see it for themselves. Armed with flashlights and a sense of excitement, they made their way through the forest and up to the imposing structure. The air grew colder as they approached, and a sense of unease settled over them. The mill's windows were like empty eye sockets, staring blankly into the night. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke and something else, something foul. Mark, the de facto leader of the group, pushed open the creaking door, and they stepped inside. The interior was a labyrinth of decaying wood and rusted metal. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling like tattered curtains, and the floor was littered with debris. The air was thick with dust, and every step they took echoed through the empty building. They explored cautiously, their flashlights casting long shadows on the walls. As they ventured deeper into the mill, the atmosphere grew heavier. They found themselves in a large room that had once been the heart of the operation. The remains of the machinery loomed over them, and the air was filled with the faint hum of something unseen. Jenny shivered and clung to Tom's arm, her bravado waning. "Do you hear that?" Lisa whispered, her voice barely audible. "Hear what?" Mark asked, shining his flashlight around the room. "It sounds like someone crying," she replied, her eyes wide with fear. They listened, and sure enough, there was a faint, almost imperceptible sound. It was like the distant wail of a child, carried on the wind. Mark's grip on his flashlight tightened, and he motioned for them to follow him. They moved towards the sound, their footsteps echoing in the vast, empty space. The sound led them to a small, dark room at the back of the mill. The door was ajar, and the crying was louder now, more distinct. Mark pushed the door open, and they stepped inside. The room was empty, save for a single, old-fashioned rocking chair. It was rocking slowly, back and forth, as if pushed by an invisible hand. "There's no one here," Tom said, his voice trembling. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind them, plunging the room into darkness. Their flashlights flickered and then went out, leaving them in pitch black. The crying grew louder, more frantic, and they could hear footsteps approaching, echoing on the wooden floor. Panic set in. They fumbled for the door, trying to open it, but it wouldn't budge. The footsteps grew closer, and the crying turned into a guttural wail. Mark pounded on the door, shouting for help, but his voice was drowned out by the cacophony of sounds. Without warning, the room was filled with an icy chill, and they felt a presence surrounding them. It was suffocating, pressing in on them from all sides. The rocking chair creaked loudly, and they could hear whispers, unintelligible but filled with malice. "Let us out," Jenny screamed, her voice breaking with fear. The doors suddenly flew open, and they tumbled out into the hallway, gasping for breath. The crying had stopped, and the mill was silent once more. They didn't stop to question what had happened. They ran. They ran through the darkened corridors, tripping over debris and nearly falling in their desperation to escape. When they finally burst out of the mill and into the cool night air, they didn't stop until they were far away from the cursed place. They collapsed on the ground, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The forest was silent around them, and the mill loomed in the distance, its dark silhouette a reminder of their ordeal. None of them spoke as they made their way back to town. They didn't need to. The haunted look in their eyes said it all. They had gone in search of adventure, but what they had found was something far more sinister. The Ashen Mill was a place of sorrow and despair, its walls soaked with the anguish of those who had perished within. The town of Pinewood never forgot the events of that night. The mill remained abandoned, a dark blot on the landscape, and the stories of its haunted halls continued to grow. No one else dared to enter, and it was left to crumble into the earth, taking its secrets with it. The Ashen Mill became a legend, a cautionary tale of a place where the past refused to rest, and where the echoes of the dead lingered on, haunting those who dared to disturb them. Years passed, and the story of the four friends' terrifying night at the Ashen Mill became another chilling chapter in the town's lore. Mark, Jenny, Tom, and Lisa never spoke of what happened in the dark room with the rocking chair. They moved on with their lives, but the shadows of that night lingered in their eyes. One cold winter morning, the townspeople awoke to find that the Ashen Mill had finally succumbed to time. A heavy snowstorm had caused its weakened structure to collapse, leaving only a pile of rubble and twisted metal. The townsfolk gathered to see the remnants of the once mighty mill, feeling a strange sense of relief that its malevolent presence was gone. Among the debris, someone found the old rocking chair, now broken and half buried in the snow. It was taken away and burned, its ashes scattering in the wind. The townspeople hoped that this final act would put the mill's restless spirits to peace. For the first time in decades, the air around the site of the Ashen Mill felt lighter. The oppressive gloom that had hung over Pinewood seemed to lift, and the forest began to reclaim the land. Nature, indifferent to the horrors of the past, moved on, and so did the town. But on quiet nights, when the wind blew just right, some claimed they could still hear the faint sound of machinery clanking and the distant cries of those lost long ago. And the memory of the Ashen Mill, with its haunting legacy, lived on in the whispers of Pinewood's tales, a reminder that some places are best left undisturbed. Thank you for watching. Subscribe.